Now slightly past 8:30, so let's formally start our meeting. And Brian, you want to start with the pre-meeting spiel?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bob. This is Brian Yates with Schwartz, Page and Harding, and welcome everyone to the Woodlands Mud Number 1 Board of Directors meeting for Tuesday, May the 18th, 2021. As in prior meetings, I'll briefly go through our remote meeting procedures and then we'll form a roll call. So to begin with, I need to remind everyone the meeting is being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we will continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, a nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely today so that we can accurately reflect the attendance and the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. When you hear your name or your company called, please respond by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed the roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. So starting with our board of directors, Bob Lilac.
Here.
Walt Leshevsky.
Present.
Ken Dorland.
Present.
Jeff Long.
Here.
Hartley McIntosh.
Present.
That completes the roll call of our directors. We do have a full quorum present. We'll move on now to Woodlands Water staff. Jim Stinson.
Present.
Mike Mooney.
Present.
Maureen Bourgeois.
Present.
Jeannie Scott. Is Jeannie in the meeting? I don't hear Jeannie on the line.
Yeah, I don't
Okay,
see
we'll move on to Shelley.
I'm here.
Okay, anyone else from Woodlands Water in the meeting? We'll move on now to Sandra Center River Authority staff. Ron Kelly.
Present.
Ed Shackelford.
Present.
Chris Meeks.
Present.
Matt Corley.
Present.
Anyone else from the River Authority in the meeting?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll move on to Mud 1 consultants. Do we have any Mud 1 consultants in the meeting today? All right, we'll move on to members of the public. Do we have any members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well.
Dan Cocorth is on the line today with Howard Hughes Corporation, the developer. How are you guys doing today? I wanted to stop in and say hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome, Dan. Do
Yep,
we have any
good to
other
be here.
members of the public present in the meeting? Maureen, does that cover everyone who's logged into the meeting?
That's everybody.
And Brian Genie has got on the line now.
Okay. All right, well, if that covers everybody logged in, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Bob to begin the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have any comments from the public? Ben or Dan, you want to say anything?
I don't have anything to report today. If the board members have any questions about anything on the development side, I'd be happy to address those. And otherwise, I'm just here to listen and to. I'm also going to let you know now that I have a constraint at 9 o'clock, so I'll be listening for about 30 minutes before I depart.
Okay, where are you off to? A golf game at Palm Springs or?
No, I've got a lot of meetings today, so I even brought my tie.
Okay, thanks.
bet.
If there, I don't see anybody else from the public, so we'll move on to the perennial item, number 3, falling star. Mike, what's the?
This is Mike. We've called and left a message on Friday, both phone and email, and have not received a return phone call or email. So I don't have anything to report. They have not responded.
So I wonder how serious they are about us doing this work on drainage. If they're not making much effort.
Well, this is Mike again. We did stress in the messages that the board's getting a little antsy about something going on. So they need to get back with us if they want this thing to continue. just
Yeah.
have not heard back.
I would use the word impatient at this time, not antsy, so. Okay, moving on. Mike, Jeannie, do we have any requests for relief?
Jeannie, I've got one this month. This is Mike. This is Francisco Garcia at 19 West Isle Place. He just purchased the home in December. The home had been on the market for a while. He purchased the home in December of 2020, and this house is unique. It's big enough to have its own cooling tower, believe it or not, for air conditioning. Well, a 1-inch copper line burst during the freeze. The customer doesn't live here full time, and did not realize it. Anyway, the gallons that leaked before they figured it out, before they shut it off, was 815,000 gallons.
Oh, mercy.
Yeah, it's a big one. The average for this home is 1,000 gallons, so the adjustment would be 814,000 gallons, which would be a total credit refund to his account of $4,892.26. He does have repair bills. He does not speak a lot of English. He has to have somebody interpret for him, and the guy does a pretty good job. He did have a repair by Aqua Trails Plumbing for this, and what they're going to do is they're going to cap off this. They're not going to rehook up this cooling tower. He's going to get rid of this and not rebuild it. So he's just cut and plugged the 1-inch copper line that burst. It does meet the requirements, and we are recommending approval.
Where'd all this water go? He didn't know where he didn't see the water or anything, or?
He was not even in town when it happened.
Oh, he wasn't?
He was still in Mexico.
No one saw it though, or anything?
No, he back 2 sides of his house back up to the lake, and no one saw it.
A question for either your attorney or Mike. In those cases like this is pretty severe. Does the insurance companies reimburse in severe situations like this? Is obvious it was damaged by the freeze, so the high water bill, I would think might come under that purview. Just a question.
This is Brian. I have not heard of somebody getting insurance coverage for a water bill reimbursement. I mean, certainly contents damage if there's a break and damage in the home, but I have not heard of a reimbursement for something like a high water bill.
Okay.
Maybe we should break.
Not to say it couldn't happen, but I just haven't heard of it.
All right.
So Mike, how much is he on the hook for?
He's still on the hook for a couple $1,000. I mean, it's still a big bill for him. You know, he's getting the surface water conversion fee is the biggest part of his credit. That's $2,400 of the $4,800. That's half of it.
Jim, a question for the future. Can AMI detect when a major extraordinary usages like this occur so we can initiate action on our part? Is there anything built into the software that detects this kind of abnormal usage?
Certainly, if the customer utilizes the technology, it's there. They can get an alert within an hour or so of high usage. Regarding our staff being alerted, yes, we can also set some parameters where we would be notified as well.
So I presume this house had AMI installed since it's in our MUD. And apparently this automatic detection of abnormal usage was not detected. Is that because it happened before the system is in place, or how did this slip through the cracks when we now have AMI?
Yeah, it was, his meter wasn't installed till after the freeze.
Okay, and he's in MUD 1 and it wasn't installed till after the freeze.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I thought we were 100% completed before. Well, I'll entertain a motion to grant the relief requested by Mike. Do we have a motion? And Brian, if there's no motion, what do we do in this case?
This is Director McIntosh. I move we approve the recommendation of the Assistant General Manager.
Do we have a second to the motion?
I second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify. Well, Brian, call the roll.
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion on the matter, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Bob, how do you vote?
Aye.
Walt,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
Jeff,
Yes.
Hartley,
Aye.
motion carries.
Okay, next we have the consent agenda. Anybody have any questions or discussions on the consent agenda? I just have one comment on the minutes on page 4, third paragraph from the bottom. There's a sentence, the goal is to have a dam expert, and I didn't know whether it's supposed to be an N after the word dam or not.
Yeah, so I move for approval of the consent calendar. This is Jeff.
Okay, so the spelling of that word is correct. So, okay, do we have a second on the consent agenda?
I'll second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye. I think the motion passed, Brian, so the shortcut on that.
Yes, sir.
Moving on to the regular agenda, the San Jacinto River Authority. Ed or Matt, who's going to take the lead on that, or Ron?
This is Matt Corley. Page 16 through 21 of your packet is the monthly operations report. Be happy to answer any questions you have on that. Just to highlight a few data points for the month of, year to date, fiscal year to date. So that's September through April, our blend ratio is 48% groundwater, 52% surface water. That's fiscal year to date.
And the plans are to keep that up?
Well, we're coming out of the winter months where there was a heavier blend towards the surface water usage. And so our summer months, you'll see that blend ratio get more towards the 65-35 blend that we budgeted for.
Why is that? Again, for economic reasons?
Well, the during the winter months, the majority of the demand is surface water. When we have the additional demands during the summer, that additional demand is met with groundwater. It's just the way the plant is operating. We're trying to keep it around 12 million gallons per day. And so the limitations at each plant and the limitations at the plant and all the other participants that we send surface water to, it's just the way we budgeted out the blends throughout the year. So there's a lot of factors in there and how much blend ratio we send to each participant. But Chris, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, it's to go back, Mr. Lilac, to your question. It's economic reasons. It's the 65-35 is due to the GRP budget and what the review committee approved for FY21.
Okay. Any further questions for Chris, Matt, Ron, or Ed? If not, we'll move on. Chris, you want to talk about the division budget?
Yes, sir. I am sharing my screen. Let me know when you can see it, please.
I see it.
All right. So a few things before we get started. The first is that this is a high-level summary of the budget. The budget package, which has the PowerPoint presentation, and executive summary, and the detailed various budgets, O&M, R&R, bonds, future facilities. All that is on the Google Drive. The presentation, as you know, is just a high-level overview to hit the high points. This month, there is no action on the budget. As a reminder, in May, we bring the budget to y'all as a draft. In June, we answer and ask any questions. And then in July, once again, answer any questions, whatnot. But in July is when the directors will direct their trustee how to vote at the August meeting. So we do have a few months before final approval. So this information is just at this point draft for discussion purposes. A couple things to note is, one, we will have a modified Woodlands budget to provide to you after this. The rate increase that you're going to see and some of the key points are not expected to change, with the exception of one item. The GRP review committee, when we presented their budget to them, they have requested basically a 4-cent reduction, which is basically some items that were in the O&M budget can be bond funded utilizing bond funds currently on hand. So if you move those items out of the GRP budget, it's a 4-cent reduction. So when the GRP budget changes, the Woodlands Division budget also changes. And so majority of the items you see in the budget will stay the same, but there will be a budget that we will come back and give next month. Actually, as soon as we get it, probably the next couple of weeks or so, we'll send out another budget. Let me see, I wrote me notes. Okay. So one other thing to note on the budget presentation is this is different from in previous years. We've taken basically the end of the presentation and put it at the beginning, then the beginning and put it at the end. So the first 3 or 4 slides is what I'm planning to go through. I can cover the entire presentation if you would like. Most of the material at the end is just basically how we got to the budget. So when we reach that point in the presentation, I'll ask if y'all want me to continue or not. And either which way, you're not going to hurt my feelings. So to get started, one of the bigger things is demands are flat in the Woodlands. For a period of time, the Woodlands was growing quite a bit, but over the last few years, we have not seen a lot of development, and we have not seen any increase or really any decrease in water or sewer sales. So demands are flat. We are looking at another year of 65% groundwater, 35% surface water built into the budget. We are looking at a 5% water and wastewater increase, which is in part due to next 2 items, which is the ongoing renewal of the aging system, as well as an increase to the R&R fund by $500,000. And of course, as you can see on the last bullet, the O&M and emergency reserves are fully funded. So this slide is the high-level overview of the entire thing you're going to see. Wanted to move on and just talk a little bit about the proposed and previous wholesale water rates only on this slide. What you're seeing here is the last 5 years of actual, the water rate, the wholesale water rate, the increase in percentage and in cents. So you can see we basically use in percentages, 3%, couple years of no rate increase, and 4s and 3s. And this year is a 5% recommended increase on the water rate, which is a 5% increase, which is 11 cents. Moving forward to the wholesale wastewater rates, same setup that you're looking at on the water side. This year, we are proposing a 5% increase, which is 23 cents on the wastewater rate. And this slide that we have here is the GRP rates. And so as a reminder, the bottom blue rate that you see there on the bottom right, that's bolded in $3.07. That is what the actual end users, it's what the Woodlands Division charges the MUDs and what the MUDs charge the residents. That rate itself is expected to go down 4 cents when the GRP review committee meets on Monday, May 24th and acts on their budget. The two rates you see above that, the groundwater pumpage fee and the surface water rate, that is what the Woodlands Division charges what the Woodlands Division pays GRP. And of course, we take those two rates and we multiply them by the blend ratio in order to get the surface water conversion fee. So those are the high level summary information related to the rates. The rest of the budget just kind of goes through the process. Some of the things we look at the O&M side and stuff like that. So at this point, I'd like to ask if anybody wants me to continue going through the presentation, or if there's any questions you have, or if you just like me to stop talking.
How long is the rest of the presentation, Matt?
It could be 5 to 10 minutes. I can run through it pretty quickly if you just like me to go through the slides and hit the high points.
I would certainly like it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it too.
Sure thing, not a problem. So what you're looking at on this slide is, this is basically the whole process of the entire budget. Our budget process starts roughly in October when we start the 10-year project plan, and then it goes all the way through August. So we're really always in a budget mode, but everything that's in the green strikeout has been done, which is the middle on the far left. Everything on the right is the process that we're in. This is the process that we run through from basically last week. So starting in May, ending in the second week in August. A lot of little steps, a lot of time for y'all to have input as well as the public as well. So one thing whenever we're doing the budget, we take a look at is the level of service that's being requested. I know a lot of times folks will just tell us, well, I want the water to come on when I open the faucet and the water to go away when I flush the toilet. In order to get there, there's a lot of steps that have to go along the way. So we look at compliance with the water and the wastewater side. As you can see, the third blue bullet, we adjust expenses based on revenue. If you have a dry year, you're making a lot more money, just a lot more water sales. So there may be some additional things that can be done if approved by the MUDs and the boards. And a year when it's very wet, you may not have enough revenue. So you have to kind of see what you can do to still get the work that needs to be done without exceeding the revenue that you have on hand. Level of service and how do we get there? This is something that's important just because not only because of the rain this week, but the winter storm and everything else that you have there is. When I look at the service, level of service requirement, I don't take it as something that's needed occasionally, you know, on a part-time basis. I look at when the MUD say, this is what we want. I'm looking at that as 24/7 type service, a full-time, if you will. So on the left, how we get there is continuous rehabilitation, something we've been talking about for quite a while. Repairing the aging lines, the infrastructure, so on and so forth, and doing it where you get as much of the useful life as you can, but you don't overextend the useful life and start having continuous service failures before you maintain that asset. Then, of course, on the right, continuous preparations. A lot of these natural events, as y'all are aware, the most recent one being the Winter Storm Uri, you know, I believe we succeeded not only because of staff as well, but also because the money and time and effort that the MUDs have allowed us to put into the infrastructure to make sure we have generators and up-to-date equipment and stuff. And so I say this because it's not a one and a done. It's something that has to be continuously done year in and year out, just to make sure that when you have those winter storms and those natural events that we continue exceeding like we did. So on the budget preparation side, what you're looking at is some of the stuff we look at on the operations on the high level. Review historical data. On the right, you'll see some of the data that we keep just for the chlorine usage, the different water plants. We actually track a lot of different chemicals, water in, water out, chemical use. We take in comparisons of different blend ratios coming in, different characteristics. There's a lot of stuff on the backside we see, so we can kind of forecast not only usage of chemical compliance, but also the budget as well. We do take a look at cybersecurity, and see what's needed on our side from the SCADA side as well as the IT side. Then, of course, we look at all of our contracts, any price increases that we may have coming up, any CPIs that are built into contracts, any rebids that we have. For example, this year, when you're going through the budget, you'll see on sludge disposal, you'll see an increase. The sludge disposal for the biosolids at the wastewater plants was rebid and just came in about a month ago, I believe. And so there's a price increase there. We look at new contracts, renewals, then of course, all the commodities like the fuel and stuff like that, to see what type of increases we're looking at going forward. Maintenance side is roughly the same with a lot of the historical data, with the key difference of we do review all of our 6,000 plus assets in the woodlands. We review them to see the likelihood of failure, consequence of failure. We score them, we rank them, we look at failure history. A lot of stuff goes into the maintenance side of things. And that's not just a one time per year. That's every day when we're touching assets, when we're looking at assets, we're evaluating them, ranking them, and putting them into our system on a continuous basis. So we get a year-round continuous look at what needs to be done. High level on asset management is kind of like we talked about before on the review of the 6,000 assets. This is a high level overview of what we do. We look at a likelihood of failure. We take out any mitigation factors. Mitigation factors could be spare pumps, spare parts, contracts, anything of that nature, redundant lines, redundant pumps, stuff like that. Look at the consequence of that asset failing, remove any mitigation, come up with a business risk exposure, which is how we rank it and score it and everything else. Then on the right, based on the score, is where we actually look to put that asset into the rehab schedule. So as you can see, if we do the math and it comes up with this pump is scores a 22. If it's a $200,000-$300,000 pump, it's probably going to be in the R&R over the next 4 years. But if it's something like a $20,000 to $50,000 pump, then we usually look to put that in next year's O&M budget. All right, so some key elements that you're going to be seeing in the budget. Demands are flat, blend ratio we talked about, long-term maintenance is continuing. But on the right of some of the production, these are the demands that you've seen in FY 21, 20 for sure, and I don't think 19, but we're looking to produce 5.9 billion gallons and sell 5.4 billion gallons. The rest of that delta between those two is, I forgot what the term is, but non-revenue water. So it's for like flushings, fires, and stuff of that nature. Then, of course, wastewater treatment staying steady at 2.9 billion gallons. So this is the high-level summary of the actual the budget itself, the O&M budget. And so as you go through with the 5% increase, you can see that there is the revenue is higher. As you go through, there's three key areas that are the reason for the 5% increase. One is salaries, wages, and employee benefits. There's a staff increase of allocated staff to the Woodlands Division by 1.3 FTEs. One is a director of legal services that the Woodlands Division receives 20% of that person's time and salaries and benefits. The accounting department has recently done an analysis of their department to see how much work was actually being done for each of the division versus how much was being charged. In that analysis, they identified that more work was being done in the Woodlands Division than what we were being charged for. So they increased the allocation by 0.5, so half an FTE to the Woodlands Division. There is also the utility enterprise, which is basically the management team that oversees Woodlands and GRP divisions, which myself and Matt are a part of. When it was first created, it was created at a 50-50 split. So half my time goes to Woodlands, half my time goes to GRP. After being in the UE for about a year now, we've identified that more work's actually done in the Woodlands, so that increase in allocation is up 10%. Excuse me. Then, of course, you do have a 3.5% proposed merit, promotion, and market adjustment increase, as well as a 9% increase in healthcare cost. When we move down a little bit more, you'll see down towards the bottom, maintenance, repairs, and parts. That's an increase of 400,000 based on blower repairs, clarifier repairs, basically maintenance that has been done that needs to be done, but has not been done over time. Then, of course, as you scroll to the bottom, you can see the R&R transfer has increased as well by the 500,000 that we talked about before. And for some reason, I can't go forward. There we go. Okay, so one thing when we presented this to the audit committee had asked us, is there any way to look at reducing the increase? And so you have three different ways that I could think of. One is delay projects. You could delay maintenance, you could cut the various items, so on and so forth. That has not been preferred nor recommended by the MUDs in the past, but I still bring it up because it is always an option. Second item was potential to use wastewater bonds. These are the bonds that were previously sold. And as you can see on the screen here, there is estimated to have some funds left at the end of the day. However, to use the wastewater bonds, it has to be a wastewater capital project, and none of the items in the O&M budget are wastewater capital, so bonds are out. But this slide does present a good overview of where we're sitting at the bonds at this point in time. The third item, if the MUDs collectively would like to reduce that rate increase from a 5 to a 4 or 3, or theoretically no increase, is to use some of the allocated funds in the R&R. Meaning at the end of the day, the R&R project is expected to have about $3 million in it that's going to be used for future projects. What we've done in the past, usually when we had no rate increases, we would basically what I call borrow from the R&R savings account. And then over time, put money back into the R&R fund so we didn't have such a large rate increase at some point. So kind of recap some of the public meetings we've been through and what's coming up. This was presented to the trustees, so I have not updated it since then, but obviously this week with the MUDs, and there's a series of times that the public does have time to come in and talk to the MUDs and the boards about the budget. Any questions at this point? Because this is the last slide.
Matt, we're talking about a $40 million bond. Do you already have that authority? Because I think it was Senator Metcalf wants to pass a law that the public would have to vote and approve a bond sale. You have any information on that?
Could I address that?
Okay.
Yeah, that bill did not get out of the House, so it's not going to happen this legislative session unless somehow it gets tacked on as an amendment to another bill. But it looks like that is dead at least for 2 years.
Good.
And just to add a little bit more, this bond that's on the screen right now was sold in 2017. And so we already have the proceeds in hand. So the only approval that will be needed is if it's a special project that's not in the 10-year project plan.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, Jim, you want to talk about DFCs?
I'm going to ask Ron Kelly to help us with that.
Okay, be happy to. As y'all probably know, I know Bob does, the proposed DFC statement has been issued by GMA 14, and we're currently in the 90-day public comment period. Lone Star will be accepting any comments. I think it's through the middle of July. They will also be holding a public hearing either June the 7th, 8th, or 9th. They haven't set the date, but those are the possible dates for the public hearing. They anticipate a lot of comments. And I think one of the things that we would stress, it's always great and helpful, and I know you have something on your agenda later in this meeting, to have written comments or resolutions or letters or anything to the Lone Star, and also copied to the other members of the GMA 14. But if there's going to be any impact, they also gauge impact by the number of people who actually make verbal comments at their public hearings. So we would also stress that it would be helpful to have some public comments made during that hearing. And as soon as we find what that date is, we will pass it on to Jim. He can pass it on to y'all. And then, as we said before, all these comments will be collected. And then currently the date of the GMA 14 meeting to finalize the DFC is October the 6th. That date may change, but that's currently the date. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions? I'd like to make a comment here that I've been going around to all the village associations in the Woodlands and any other organization that wants to hear me talking against what Lone Star wants and even what GMA 14 has approved. And I would certainly encourage everyone in our MUD and online to, as an individual, as a person, to sign the petition that is on the Township Future website. So far, we have over 500 signatures, and that was a number that we had a month ago. I don't know what the current number is, but we're trying to get 2,000, at least 2,000 signatures on that petition. So I would encourage you as individuals to sign that petition, and you can find that at townshipfuture.org. And there's a tab in the upper right called petition. And so far, I've gotten pretty good response from the village associations, and they are addressing this in their newsletters. So we really need to get the word out. I know many of us have some pretty strong feelings about the subsidence issue and the lack of consideration by Lone Star to not include subsidence in their DFC considerations. So, any further comment?
Thank you, Bob, for your hard work. Appreciate it.
Okay, moving on to item 12. You've seen the resolution in your packet regarding the DFCs that we just talked about here. Ryan, do you have anything to add or say on this?
This is Brian. No, I did take a look at it and provide some comments to Jim. I think those are incorporated into the final version that is being presented for approval today.
Anybody have any comments or want to say anything about the resolution? If not, I make the motion that we approve the resolution regarding DFCs, and that MUD and I, as president, will sign on to the resolution representing MUD 1.
As Jeff, I will second that motion, Bob.
Any further discussion? If not, Brian, call the vote.
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion on item 12, we'll call the vote. Bob, how do you vote?
Aye.
Walt?
Aye.
Ken?
Aye.
Jeff?
Yes.
Hartley?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to item 13. Brian?
This is Brian. Under the attorney's report, we are really in the home stretch of the legislative session. Got a couple weeks to go. You can check the bill tracker list that we provided last month for updates there. It'll link you over to the Texas Legislature online, and you can see which bills are moving and which ones aren't, as Ron mentioned, for that one bill regarding voter approval for revenue bonding authority. So we're getting down to the very end of it at this point, but I think that's really it from a legislative perspective, other than we do have a little bit of an update regarding cybersecurity training. A bill was passed, House Bill 1118, that does clarify who has to complete the cybersecurity training. You'll recall we talked about this initially a couple of years ago when the first bill passed, and the language of the bill did not seem to indicate that all directors, regardless of whether they had access to a local government computer system or database that would be susceptible to a cybersecurity threat, would be required to complete that training. from a common sense perspective, it didn't make sense that for somebody who didn't have access to a system that would be a cybersecurity risk to have to complete the training. But the Department of Information Resources, an entity that I think most folks didn't even know existed before this legislation came out, that group or that department was tasked with implementing that bill. And they took a very expansive interpretation of the bill to require all MUD directors and other elected officials and appointed officials to complete the training, regardless of whether they had access to one of these systems. So we've got, directors that don't even have access to a Google Drive like you do in the Woodlands that have been required to complete training. So the legislature was made aware of that, and they did go and revise the language of that bill to essentially override the interpretation of the Department of Information Resources. So now a government official is only required to complete the cybersecurity training if they have access to a local government computer system or database and use that computer system or database to perform at least 25% of their duties. Now, what does that mean for the Woodlands? Y'all are a little different than your typical run-of-the-mill MUD. You do receive a lot of your documents online through the Google Drive. You're not really accessing other systems of Woodlands Water, but you do have access to that. And I mean, I think arguably most directors are probably accessing that for a good bit of their responsibilities as a director. I think initially we should probably continue to have Woodlands directors complete that training, and then we can revisit that as time goes on if we think that we can generally say that none of the districts, because you don't want one approach for one district and a different one for another. We try to keep consistency in the Woodlands. So I think if we can get to a comfort level that none of the directors are using even the Google Drive for 25% of their duties as a director, then maybe we stop the compliance requirement. But I think for now, and now being this year's compliance cycle, go ahead, if you haven't already done so, complete your AWBD training for cybersecurity, and then we can revisit that as time goes on. But I did want to make you aware that that bill did pass and is out there, and will generally be applicable to most MUDs, but in the Woodlands, I think it's a little bit unique and probably justifies directors continuing to complete that training, at least for the time being. Happy to answer any questions y'all may have.
Brian, this is Jeff. What if you're sure you don't use it for 25% of your business with a MUD? I'm just curious as an individual director.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a director responsibility. I mean, and we talked about before, there's no penalties associated with non-compliance in the original bill or in this amendment that just passed. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. It's not a district compliance issue. It's a director compliance issue, similar to completing your open records training and Public Information Act training. So if a director is confident that they don't use a local government computer system or database for 25% of their duties, then you would not complete it.
Any further questions, comments?
Yeah, let me ask the attorney, are you familiar with the American Jobs Act, and how does that impact the MUDs? And is there some kind of positive impact to us?
Yeah, this is Brian. So good question. It actually came up, I think maybe the last two trustee meetings, and we had an agenda item on the trustees' agenda for last week to talk about it a little bit more. Jim and staff are going to be looking at some consultants to assist with that. I mean, it's a bit early because there's no legislation that's been passed, and there's all kinds of talk about breaking it into pieces, and we'll see how that shakes out. But I think there did seem to be an interest in getting out in front of that with the expectation that we don't know what's going to pass, but something's going to pass, and to go ahead and get someone lined up to be able to work, a consultant that could work their way through the qualification requirements to be able to access some of the funds that everyone expects will be available for water, wastewater infrastructure.
Okay, moving on to item 14. Brian, can you review what the key revisions are in policy content?
This is Brian. Did we not have, doesn't look like we have a copy of the, we had it in last month, I guess, but
Yes.
not this month. So basically the revisions to the content policy were to, from a structural perspective, this policy had been updated since '95, and there were a lot of places where the statutory or the regulatory requirement language was lifted and put directly into this policy, and I wanted to change the structure of that to, instead of regurgitating all that verbiage, to just refer to those applicable statutes, so that from time to time, either the regulations can change through TCEQ or the statutes can change to the legislature. And by referring to those provisions as amended, or any successor statutes as in effect, would allow for this document to become an evergreen document, so to speak, and be applicable even when there are those types of changes. So that was the main thrust of what my revisions were. I did also update the term of these agreements to be the industry standard of 15 years. In this original document, it was a 5-year period, which, may have been workable back in the early go-go days of the Woodlands, when you could have one of these agreements for reimbursement signed up, get the infrastructure in the ground, and create the value necessary to issue the bonds all within a 5-year period. That's pretty doggone aggressive in this day and age. But I mean, the market's pretty hot right now in active developing communities, but in the Woodlands, you're pretty well built out. I think for MUD, as we talked about last month, for MUD 1, this is more of a, lack of a better term, an academic exercise than an actual functional or impactful document approval, because you don't really have any undeveloped property, or you don't have any undeveloped property. I think Howard Hughes confirmed that last month. Dan did in the meeting, that you don't have undeveloped property in the district. So the only time you would even be considering a content going forward would be if somebody was trying to do a redevelopment that required some additional new infrastructure, public infrastructure, that would be conveyed to the district. Don't know if that's going to happen or not, but this is a consolidated policy. So we do, as a matter of course, have each district approve any policy amendment to make sure that we have the same rules for each district. I think in reality, we've only got maybe 2 or 3 districts that have, in Montgomery County, that have property yet to be developed that would possibly be using an updated content. So that's the purpose of the content revisions. We also had discussion that Hartley raised about redevelopment in the Woodlands, and redevelopment that would modify the capacity necessary to serve a particular track. And that is a somewhat related, but is a different discussion, because you can have someone go and redevelop a particular track, a tear down or modification of a use of an existing building that does not require any new infrastructure to be conveyed to the district, that where a content would never even be involved. So a reimbursement agreement, a content agreement, would not really address that scenario. And we talked about the need to coordinate with the DSC and Walt and potentially Arthur Bredehoff about having a checklist item for DSC approval for redevelopments to require the landowner to have confirmed with the MUD that capacity is available to serve whatever that proposed redevelopment is. And that landowner is going to have to come to the district, whichever district it may be. If they need capacity over and above what's been provided, they're going to have to come to the district to obtain that capacity. We've had that happen a limited number of times so far. Off the top of my head, I can think of MUD 36 for sure. And that developer can be required to go, or whoever's doing the redevelopment, be required to purchase that capacity or advance the funds to the district to purchase that capacity from the River Authority. So that's a related issue, but is different from a actual content. A content is for development of new infrastructure and be reimbursed by a developer who will convey that infrastructure to the district for ownership and operation. And then the district will have an obligation to reimburse the developer for the cost of that infrastructure once they've created sufficient taxable value to be able to pay for the debt service, or if you're paying it in cash, to pay for a cash reimbursement of that infrastructure. So hopefully that clarifies the two issues we were talking about last month.
And Brian, just for information purposes, I did visit with Walt yesterday and also Arthur Bredehoff. Arthur's now the chairman of the DSC, and I forwarded to him our land use designation water wastewater capacity list, which lists the capacity needed for all the different types of land use. So we've started the discussion. Arthur seems to understand that needs to be something that would be part of the DSC review. And so I'll be following through with that and reporting on that as we make progress.
I had a conversation with them also. Thinking back after we talked, Jim, I can't really think of any redevelopment that has taken place inside of the district that would generate any type of capacity increase. I mean, most of the redevelopment has been homes. So it's been one home knocked down, another home put up there. But, it stayed within the initial land use designation from a square footage standpoint. So, we haven't allowed anything to go in that was, say, like twice the size of the home that was there previously.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of any businesses that, were just totally torn down and that we put a big warehouse there or something twice the size as what was previous there.
And even if the home were twice the size, it wouldn't necessarily need any change in the water infrastructure or water demand. In fact, maybe even less, because there'd be less irrigation involved in that home.
What's the efficiency of probably what's being put in now versus what was put in 40 years ago? I mean, there are some homes that still have the original toilets in there that, use, I don't know what amount of gallons.
3 gallons, they used to use 3 gallons. The new ones use 1.5.
Yeah.
So Hartley, last month, you had some concerns about content. Do you want to review any of those concerns?
Director McIntosh, I still have the same concerns. The Design Standards Committee, at their pleasure, gets to change the status of every plot in the Woodlands. For example, on Indian Clover Drive, when it was a showcase, a home street, it was limited to 3,000 square foot, and you had a coverage of 60% that had to be in natural, and it's been changed to up to 3,500 square foot and 40% of coverage. So we never knew about any of these things. Now, my concern is that we have to have something in place that says, if you want to tear down the forum, which has separate houses, it has all sorts of different things, and you want to build something like we currently have at Hughes Landing, a huge apartment complex of 300 apartments, that the MUD should be given an opportunity to comment on that, even though we don't own the land anymore. Now, all commercial properties, when we started, all commercial properties in the Woodlands were owned by the developer. So we had a lot different kind of approach to this thing, and we always had at every meeting a representative from the developer, initially Olaf Skierson, and then we had Mr. Deere, and they came to every meeting to tell us what was going on and get our approval if they were going to make changes. We don't have that anymore. We don't have the developer coming to us. We don't have the developer owning the properties anymore. And the other issue is, if a property develops and redevelops and they have a considerable infrastructure change, we don't want to pay for it. And I'll give you an example. Where Dr. Lewis now operates in a commercial area across from Panther Creek Village Center, that was initially obtained, that land was obtained by Scott Mitchell, and he was going to put in condos, business condos that people would own. And there was a tremendous infrastructure to those facilities, and he asked that the MUD pay for it. MUD 40 said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you the infrastructure, the San Jacinto River Authority loop infrastructure and the MUD infrastructure. We're not going to pay for that or bond for it. So we made a conscious effort to set a policy in that regard. And later on, when they built the forum, we didn't pay for that infrastructure. So these things are not covered in the content today. And I have expressed a desire to have either a new policy developed that protects the MUDs, so that if we have a complete change in the usage, land usage, that we can coordinate that change with the person who operates the roads, which is Precinct 3. And of course, the good example of all this and how it just created a huge problem was Esprit Academy. And you can't tell me that the daycare center, which was for about 40 children per day, and now the Esprit Academy, that is a pre-K through 12 school, has the same usage, water and sewer, or standard family equivalents that are going to be charged to the MUD. And this was my objection. Are there any questions?
I don't think that Dr. Lewis's property has changed in 20 years, though, Hartley.
No, it hasn't changed in 20 years. I'm saying we set a precedent for MUD 40, which is carried over to MUD 1, which says if you're going to buy a piece of land and you have tremendous infrastructure, for example, MUD 40 paid for the infrastructure in Panther Creek Shopping Center. All of the infrastructure that was put in by MUD 40 and by San Jacinto River Authority. We said we don't want to do that anymore. And so we set a precedent on that. That, by the way, was carried over when they built the Lutheran Church on Lake Woodlands Drive.
Well, I think you have a valid point on something. I think Arthur will take care of it. I'm sure he'll bring it up to the DSC and they'll put that in the restrictions, the deed restrictions. But like I'm saying, I can't think of anything that has been, you know, a major redevelopment that has impacted that.
And even with the revisions to content, we still have the right to deny paying for that infrastructure, as I understand it.
This is Brian. Correct. If we don't have the infrastructure, if we don't have the capacity, they would have to come to the district and request that the district obtain the capacity. When they come to the district and request that the district obtain that capacity, that's when the conversation happens about, well, this is what we would want you, the developer or redeveloper, to do or pay in order for us to go and obtain this additional capacity from the River Authority, because at this point, it's impossible to know, is there going to be excess capacity in the River Authority system available for that property, or is there going to have to be some sort of an expansion or some other type of alteration of the existing River Authority system that could be a good bit more expensive? And you're not going to know that answer until somebody comes to you on a particular piece of property. The River Authority analyzes its system to see if there's existing excess capacity available, or if there's going to have to be modifications, and what the cost of that would be to have that discussion with that redeveloper. That, there's just too many variables to be able to nail all that down in advance. You have to wait till you're approached. If you don't have capacity, then you have that conversation with whoever the potential redeveloper is.
Brian, what have the other MUDs done? Have they all approved it, or is there MUDs that, like us, did not approve it last month?
This is Brian. You're talking about the content
Yes.
amendment. Everybody, all the other MUDs approved the content agreement last month.
Okay, so we're the last one. So whether we approve or disapprove won't make any difference. Is that correct?
This is Brian. So if MUD 1 does not approve it, then we would have a updated policy for 9 MUDs, and the old policy from 95 would remain in place for MUD 1.
Hartley, you like the old policy compared to the new one revision?
Well, I have no objection to the new one. It just doesn't include what we need, and that's coordination with the DSC and approval that we get when there's changes in the standard family equivalent unit and how those are paid for. And as I said last month, that may require a new policy. I am also somewhat nervous about the lack of coordination we have with the developer anymore, because we don't ever see the developer at any of our meetings. And it used to be they had somebody there every one of the meetings. They told us what was going to happen in the Woodlands and what was going to affect our MUD. But as far as the current content is a revision, it does what the old content said. It does not address the redevelopment of the Woodlands, which is now occurring. And I think if you want to say the old content should be approved because it's updated with no changes, basically, I have no objection to that. If there is an acknowledgement that we need a policy to go forward on redevelopment.
Well, even if we vote to approve it, that doesn't mean we cannot make changes in the future. So maybe, Brian, that's something that we need to revisit in the near future. And I'm kind of suggesting, at least my feeling is that we approve this current revision with the understanding that the concerns that Hartley raised will at least be looked into and considered for future revision.
And Bob, you're correct. I will be following through on that concern that Hartley's brought up with the DSC and Arthur Breederhoff.
Okay.
And the developer.
And the developer, yes, sir.
And with that in mind, Bob, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion we approve. I need to get to item 15 before I have to depart. So I'd like to move this item and with those considerations in mind.
And I will second that motion. Any further discussion? Brian, call the vote.
Okay, this is Brian. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote. Bob, how do you vote?
Aye.
Walt?
Aye.
Ken?
Aye.
Jeff?
Yes.
Hartley?
Abstain.
Motion carries 4 in favor, 1 abstention.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 15, the consolidation report. I've been having ongoing discussions with Mud 6 and Neil Gaynor, the president, told me that it's his opinion that the Mud 6 directors are largely not in favor of consolidation, even though we've had not submitted our report. We have not gotten together with our group. And as you know, we did not take action last month. And Neil said they're not going to take any action on their part this month. So again, it's still a work in progress. Though I put up on the Google Drive, and I hope each one of you downloaded what I hope is a final draft of the report that's been edited by Mud 6 as well as Mud 1. So that part should be final. But Mud 6, basically Neil Gaynor also wanted to do some further study on the financials. Now those documents were put up late afternoon on the Google Drive, and if you haven't downloaded, be sure to download it. And I made some additions to what Neil did to make it a little bit easier to understand. He just included gross numbers for Mud 1 and Mud 6. And I felt you can't strictly compare them without relating them to something. And the choice I had was either the number of connections or the number of billing units. And I think what's more relevant is the billing units, since the number of connections per billing unit varies all over the map, depending on whether it's a large business, church, or a home with irrigation systems and so forth. So all that information is there. And I'm hoping that in the next week or two that I will get together with Neil Gaynor and Brooke Hamilton and Walt Liszczewski for us to go over the details and come up with recommendation. So I think we're inching closer to having a meeting of the minds on what we're going to do and recommend. So does anybody have any comments or questions on the material that was on Google Drive?
Yeah, Bob, this is Jeff. Yeah, I thought the report was good. I read through it in detail. I had several questions, but you letting us know that this thing is not cooked yet. I will save a lot of my questions for later. But I did have one that related to the MUD 2 and 40 earlier. Did that result in a lower tax rate for the combination of the two? Because we have a slight, very slight difference with 6. It's minuscule.
Yes, it was a reduction in the tax rate, and I don't know whether it favored both MUD 2 and MUD 40. I don't remember those details, but the tax rates were slightly different between the two. And
No, we didn't have, this is Director McIntosh. There was no significant difference in that tax rate. MUD 40 had consistently lowered the tax rate every year since its, with one exception, since its inception. And we stopped doing that because we wanted to build up a reserve. But it wasn't an issue. It was never an issue with anyone because they were so close together. And we decided in both MUDs that we wanted a reserve so that if there was a new bond issue, we could pay out of that bond so we didn't have to carry it for 30 years, which in fact MUD 40 did on the previous 2 bonds that were released by San Jacinto River Authority.
and if consolidation were to occur, and we use the lower MUD 1 tax rate, the impact on revenue would be very, very small, like a couple thousand.
Yeah, it looked like nearly nothing, Bob. I just was wondering, and holistically, when you talk about an $87,000 savings, that may not be significant enough to even make a thousandth of a cent difference. I don't know. But I just was curious. I'll leave that for next time, but I do like what you did. It was very informative, and it helps me decide whether we should move forward or try to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on item 15?
Yeah, one quick thing. Bob, I think trying to meet with Neil maybe next week or this week I think that's imperative that we try to do that. My biggest concern though, and I do have an email in to Jim Carmen with Howard Hughes to see if you and I can maybe have a Zoom call with him or go meet with him, is what they're going to do from redevelopment of that shopping center. And also, there's talks about them putting an apartment complex on the corner of Grogan's Mill and what is it, North Millbend there?
Yes.
So I mean, there's more downside to us than there is upside. From future. I think MUD 6 would end up having more benefits than we would. But anyway, I think we need to meet with Neil and bring this to a head and just either go with it or, we're just spinning our wheels here with these guys. Especially with their thought process of even not voting for it before they even have the information in front of them. It's not very encouraging.
And this, I'm very candid about this, that I think one of the concerns of the MUD 6 directors is the elimination of 5 positions that pay $150 a month for 30 or 40 minutes worth of work. I mean, that's my personal opinion. And we saw this before when MUD 6 turned down consideration of merging with MUD 2, which is why we went to MUD 40. So I don't know whether the same directors are still there or not, but that's certainly a personal concern that I think many of the directors are thinking about. That's my personal opinion. Probably shouldn't have shared it, but at least that's my personal opinion.
You're probably right. All right. Move on to the next one.
enough of that. Okay, Brian, what do we need to do on item 16 to consider an act on? I mean, aren't these volunteers doing this, and the cost is to us is relatively minimal?
Hey, Bob, this is Jeff. Before you get into that, I got to run to the office by 10. And so I appreciate you indulging me, and I will be sure to catch you soon.
Okay, thank you.
And Bob,
Yes.
I requested or put this item on the agenda, and it's more of a show of support for this effort than it is a financial issue. We're requesting that you allocate $1,000 out of your storm sewer maintenance budget to help fund markers for volunteers, either that come to us here at our office or even over at originates at the Woodlands Township. So it's more of a formality just to show your support for that effort.
Well, I'm certainly in favor of it, because I think that is a problem that occurs in cities everywhere, people pouring stuff down the drain. So I will move that we approve a budget of $1,000 to support volunteers to put these markers on our storm sewers drains. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, Brian?
This is Brian. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote. Bob, how do you vote?
Aye.
Walt?
Aye.
Ken?
Aye.
Jeff?
I think Jeff is left.
Jeff logged off, and Hartley.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, Mr. Jim, you're up.
Thank you very much. Just to recap some of the items that were reviewed at the trustee meeting. As Jeff asked earlier about the American Jobs Plan, I've got a request from trustees to start looking into how we might utilize a consultant or other outside resources to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity to get funding from that program. We did report on the Neil Gaynor's effort to get seated at the San Jacinto River Authority or the San Jacinto River Regional Planning Group, new voting membership. That is action has not been taken on that, but I think there's a detailed information in your packet if you're interested in following that effort. We do have the monthly report from our HART consortium in your packet if you have questions on that topic. I did report the effort to address 2 neighborhoods and their concerns about the AMI poles. We have found 2 potential sites to relocate those poles, but it's still being vetted through the township and their parks department. We did report the Spring Creek project, the initial or the additional consulting work on installing detention ponds upstream of Spring Creek, upstream of the Woodlands is underway. The San Jacinto River Authority has issued their RFQ, so they will be selecting and scoring consultants to continue with that analysis. We did report the Texas Water Development Board approved funding assistance for the Bear Branch, Panther Branch drainage improvement concept. Ed Shackelford talked a lot about the Trinity River Authority water supply contract currently in place with the San Jacinto River Authority, and the need to get some feedback from our trustees and directors by, I think, July of this year, whether or not to continue with that effort. It's going to move into a more expensive phase if we keep that contract in place. And in your trustee summary, there's a detail about that if you've got questions on that topic. Chris Meeks did report on wastewater treatment facility number 1 and the 10-man preliminary engineering report. The trustees authorized moving forward with narrowing down the process for that. I think there were 5 options presented in the preliminary engineering report, and they were requested to narrow those down to 3. And also, Chris Meeks talked about an additive that has been showing results and improvements in odor and other issues and around the Woodlands community. The trustees recommended he go ahead with that effort to try to improve odor conditions at wastewater treatment plant 1 as well. On page 41 in your packet is a social media update for our public information outreach. And the Marine prepared a nice list of Woodlands Water Agency operational efficiencies that she and others have helped implement over the last several months. That's in your packet. And also reported we are continuing discussions with TACUS. The number of damages has dropped significantly. Our attorney is working with setting up a meeting with the 5 prime contractors here in the Woodlands to recover damages that have been incurred by the various MUDs. So that should happen very soon. And that concludes my report, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Jim. If we move these AMI polls, are we likely to get some new blowback from residents in the area, or will we be comfortable that there'll be no objections if we move them?
We are very carefully looking at that topic, because that's the last thing we want to do. So that's part of the vetting process that's being looked at right now to make sure that they wouldn't have a strong visual impact with any homeowners.
What's the estimated cost of relocating those poles?
I think it's in your packet. It's well over $200,000.
And is MUD 1 bearing all of that, or do these poles serve other MUDs as well?
Well, they actually serve MUD 6 and MUD 60 is where the locations that are in question are in MUD 6 and MUD 60. I think if a decision is made to relocate them, there's some argument to be made that it could be shared by the MUDs because it covers, the signals come in from areas outside of just those MUD districts, but that would have to be discussed as well.
So you're talking all 9 or 10 MUDs, or just MUDs that the towers serve?
Well, to be determined. That would be a discussion to have before we move forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to have that discussion before we move forward.
Okay, any further questions or discussions?
Director McIntosh, would you please address the Tin Man and the odor that is objected to by the small enclave that belongs to another MUD, which is north of Grogan's Point off Sawdust? Would you please comment on that?
Yes, the trustees instructed the San Jacinto River Authority. Well, first of all, the preliminary engineering report was discussed with the trustees. That was recently completed. It's on the Google Drive for review for directors that want to look at that. And Ron, you want to help me, or Chris, with the details of what the path forward is?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Chris, it's okay if I go jump in?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. There were 5. Well, first of all, the recommendation from the consultant is to design a facility to have fan that can blow up to 13,000 CFM, which is a lot of air. It's a lot of air. And there are some potential consequences that comes with that high of a rate of a fan. So we're looking at that. And we're also looking at, as Jim mentioned, there were 5 different vendors, 5 different unique vendors of equipment. And what we were planning on doing is narrowing it that down to 3, as Jim said, and then putting a package together so that each one of those unique different packages could be vendors, could be bid against each other so that we could provide the best value to the Woodlands. And then we're going to move forward with that evaluation and bring that evaluation back to the trustees probably in a couple of months. And concurrently, Chris is working with this additive to see if we could utilize the additive, if that would help reduce any odors that are in the system. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Does that help?
Thank you, Ron. Hartley, you have anything to add to the trustees report?
No, except that the initial evaluation was that the plant was not in violation of any required legislative standards. And all this is to please people. And the cost of all of this was in question, who's going to pay for it? Because I asked, who signed the Con 10? And I've never got an answer on that. And that's one of those instances where you got to be sure that you're covered when you sign a Con 10, or they're going to do something that's going to affect it. And in regard to that, I won't go into it, but there's considerable discussion about the plan in which we've already we advertised for a contract on consolidation of our sewer treatment plants. And Ron, you might want to comment on that, where we are on it right now.
Sure, I'd be happy to. To your point, Harley, before that, the cost of the tin man would be about somewhere around or less, just south of $2 million for just that facility. And it was pointed out in the study that will not address all of the sources of potential odor at Plant 1. It would only address one. To your point about the consolidation, yes, the RFQ has been issued, and I believe the SOQs are due early in June. We will go through a process to evaluate them, select a consultant, and come back to the MUDs. I think Chris is like July or August with a selected firm. Is that right time frame, Chris?
Yeah, so SOQs actually come in today, but we don't act through negotiations and scope. We don't bring it back to the MUDs till July at the earliest, possibly August.
Okay.
And how long would the study take?
At least 12 months.
At least a year.
Scope is. Yeah.
So summer of next year.
Okay.
And one other note to kind of put a bow around all this additive that Chris is looking at, we would want to test it out to see if it works through the winter months. And so that testing period would also probably take 9 months, potentially a year, before we would know the results. So the results of that additive and if it works or not would probably be available about the same time that the results of the consolidation study would be available.
The Tin Man project has a life expectancy of about how many years?
15 to 20, just depending on the material used and the piping, everything.
Yeah.
I'd say 15 to 20.
It's mechanical equipment, so.
And would that be salvageable, or could it be relocated to a new plant to make use of it?
Well, I mean, potentially, it's a fan and it's piping, so you potentially could. However, the need for the Tin Man does not exist in any of the other locations.
Okay, moving on to our last item. Any matters for placement on the future agenda? I think we want to include the DFC discussion again, as well as consolidation on next month's agenda. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, Trinity water supply option. Did you get that? Director McIntosh, Trinity water supply option.
What is it? What exactly is that, Hartley? I guess I'm not familiar.
Well,
Water
I
from,
will let Ron Telling discuss that.
okay,
I'd be happy to. If you look at the long-term future of water supply in Montgomery County, and I don't want to get into how much groundwater is available, but at some point in time, all of the water that is currently in Lake Conroe will be allocated and be used by the county. And at some point, more water will be needed by Montgomery County. We're talking 40, 50 years from now. The River Authority has an option contract with the Trinity River Authority for 50,000 acre feet of water, which would supplement what's going into Lake Conroe. We're at a point where starting and that costs about $240,000 a year to keep that option. We're at a point where we're going to have to enter a service area agreement in the end of this year and start spending money to get to be able to transfer that water from Livingston down to Montgomery County. That's going to cost some legal costs, and then by 2028 we're going to have to pay a full reservation fee, which would be more in the order of $1.5 million to $2 million a year. So the cost of securing and keeping that water is going to continue to go up, and that water is not needed again for 20, 30, 40 years. So the question we're asking everybody is, we know that there's a lot of concern about rates, but there's also a lot of concern about long-term water supplies. And we need to have input into our board July, like Jim said, by July, no later than August, as to whether or not our participants who are going to end up paying for part of that want to pay a little bit of a few pennies a month to secure that water, even though it's not going to be used for 30 or 40 years from now. So that's generally what it's about.
well, if they're looking for $1 million or $1.5 million, isn't that close to extortion?
Well, no, river authorities in Texas, I mean, if we don't, it costs them to keep and maintain the facilities that has that water. And all river authorities in Texas, you have to pay to basically reserve that water for future use. If we give up the option contract, then the city of Houston more likely will gobble it up because they need that water in the future. And they won't have any problem in paying for that. Call it insurance, call it whatever it is, but it's a fee to make sure your name is on that water in the future.
Director McIntosh, having been present at the creation of this, it was a wonderful thing, and we were amazed that we could pull it off to get this when we initially did it, because everyone wants that water. And of course, San Jacinto River Authority has a big commitment to furnish water to their commercial customers as well. And they needed this as well. And we have not approached, as I recall, we have not approached the Lone Star Conservation District to see if they want to cooperate and pay for part of this.
I can probably answer that one, Hartley. They are not. They are in the, well, their job is to manage the aquifer, not to pay for solutions that would address how the aquifer is managed. So there won't be any money. They're 99.99% sure there won't be any money from Lone Star to pay for this.
Yeah,
This would
there,
have to come from our users, people who buy water, surface water from us.
yeah, Lone Star would be happy to pump more groundwater.
Yes. And
Can't even get them to pay for an extensometer.
Yeah, I believe what it equates to is somewhere around 25 cents per month per
For a 10,000 gallon user after 2028.
in the Woodlands. And then also, I mean, it would be shared also our largest customers, raw water customers in the Highlands, which includes Chevron and Exxon. They would everybody would share in this cost. It's just, this is not just a Woodlands thing. This is everybody who purchases surface water from us. And so that's why we're seeking your comments and your thoughts. And, you know, do we give it up or do we keep it?
So are we gonna need to vote on that sometime in the near future?
Well, I don't know how Jim's gonna handle that, but we will need some kind of written comments, preferably written comments, or verbal to our board at a meeting in July or August. So I'm not sure, Jim, how you're gonna handle that, but we will need some sort of message delivered to our board in those regards.
We are introducing you to the topic this month. If you look in the trustee summary, there's a very lengthy discussion about it. And we will ask for formal action and either next month or July at the latest.
Okay, if there's anything further? If not, we move on to the most important item on our agenda. And that's adjournment. So hopefully we can meet in person next month, Jim. That would be great if we could. And we get to see Shelley again in person. That would be nice. So thanks, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all next month. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Y'all be
Stay
careful.
dry. Stay dry.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.